Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Teenage financial independence. I talk with a current high school teacher today about whether that's possible and why is financial education for teens and young adults still in such a sad state today on Get Rich Education. Checkbook IRAs have been ruled illegal by the U.S. tax court. With contribution limits 10 times what traditional and Roth IRAs allow, get total control of all of your IRA funds without paying the nasty UBIT tax with the retirement plan answer left standing, the EQRP. You can invest your retirement funds in real estate, gold, Bitcoin, and even your own business. This works whether you're a solopreneur or have up to 50 employees. Learn more about getting started. Text EQRP in all caps to 72,000. The annual Spartan Summit is on. I was the kickoff speaker at the last event. This year they are back in person, and the keynote speaker is none other than Shark Tank's Damon John. Learn from industry experts on real estate, tax strategy, lending, and entrepreneurship. You'll also get to tour tangible turnkey income property in growing Alabama markets. It's coming February 16th to 18th in Birmingham, Alabama. Get your ticket or learn more at SpartanInvest.com today.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE, from Ecuador's Cotopaxi to Alaska's Denali, spanning 188 nations worldwide. You're listening to one of America's longest running and most listened to shows on real estate investing, economics, and wealth mindset. This is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. My home nation of the United States still appears to be in a sad state of financial education as I talk to a high school personal finance teacher today. And we're going to learn just how rare he is simply in being a high school personal finance teacher and what kinds of things are taught in scholastic personal finance. Now, when I was younger, gosh, I probably wish that I would have had a high school teacher like this guy. He is Colorado-based, and he also does work to promote personal finance out of his state attorney general's office. I think, like any teacher knows, it's not just your knowledge base, it's being able to explain things in a way that teens can understand. Do they grasp things today like good debt versus bad debt, and cash flow, and leverage, and inflation? Now that the latest CPI inflation number came in at 7% earlier this month, that's the highest since 1982, by the way. Now, I graduated from high school easily more than a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and the main path then that was instilled inside of me by my school and by my parents was to study hard and get good grades so I could go to college and get a job and work until I'm 65. My dad, though, he was probably a little more encouraging than my mom to perhaps look into taking a less safe path. But overall, my parents, Kurt and Penny Weinhold, they get a ton of credit for giving me a stable home and a great ethical foundation. Now, I graduated from Coudersport High School in Pennsylvania. My class rank was 17th out of 75. Yeah, a pretty small class, and that was the biggest public school in the entire county. It was a really rural area there in upstate Pennsylvania. So I was not in the top quarter, but I guess I was in the top third of my class, and I just really did not care much about studying. And if you were grading me strictly on effort, I deserved either an F or perhaps a D. As a teen, I thought it was pretty cool to take the money that I had and gamble on football games and baseball games. I was really into that, and I don't do that at all as an adult. And after I graduated high school, gosh, I was so underdeveloped at graduation. When I got my high school diploma, I looked like I was 13 years old. That's one reason why I never had a girlfriend. And, you know, I probably fit perfectly into the late bloomer category in life. But hey, that's probably all right, because some people never bloom at all. They live below their means their entire life. Anyway, when I graduated high school, all of my friends went to college. I mean, all of them. And I'm not saying that my 74 other classmates went to college, but all of my friends. So therefore, here's me as a 17-year-old high school graduate. I was almost 18. The question that I felt was incumbent to ask myself then, it was not, should I go to college? The question that I thought I should ask myself is, where will I go to college? Because of course you're going. That's just what you do. That's how my environment shaped my thinking then. But I just wasn't that interested in going to college. I didn't want to do much more than exercise and trade baseball cards as a 17-year-old. So I did not apply to any college right up until their deadline. In fact, I didn't apply to any college until 6 weeks after the college's deadline out there in Western Pennsylvania, but they did accept me into their geography program. I just really knew that I liked geography. So I didn't get a real meaningful financial education until after college, starting with reading the Rich Dad books. So that's part of my story. Let's talk to our guest about the state of teenage financial education today. Today's guest is interesting because he is a high school teacher of business and marketing. He's also a real estate investor along with his wife, and he's a personal finance advocate based in Denver, Colorado. And in his 18 years of teaching high school, he's taught personal finance, entrepreneurship, and marketing. You know, some of those things that you might not think would even get taught in high school. One of his passions involves working with teenagers. He volunteers also with something called the Money Wiser Initiative out of the Colorado Attorney General's office to help advance financial literacy in Colorado secondary education. And then last month, Bigger Pockets released his book called, get this title, First to a Million, A Teenager's Guide to Achieving Early Financial Independence. Welcome to GRE, Dan Sheeks.
Hi, Keith. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
It's so good to have you. Sheeks is spelled Sheeks. And Dan, part of the title to your book is Early Financial Independence for Teens. And I'd like to know, what do you really mean by that? I mean, do you mean that they don't need an allowance anymore? Or do you mean something more advanced, like teens are setting themselves up so that later in young adulthood, they can have financial independence?
Yeah, it would definitely be the latter. It would be teenagers starting to use different strategies and tactics and learning different topics so that they can achieve early financial independence much earlier in life, but probably not as a teenager. It might be at best mid to late 20s, 30s, 40s, something like that.
Okay. And of course, teens can be very different, right? A 13-year-old, they might be in 7th or 8th grade, and a 19-year-old might be relatively new in college, all the way up to halfway through college. So we're talking about teenagers here, and they are quite different. And now, when I think back to myself being a teenager, I was dealing with baseball cards. I had the best collection of kids of anyone in town. Soon I was setting up a table at baseball card shows. I followed stock ticker symbols in the Olean New York Times Herald newspaper. And now in high school, I belonged to FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America. Dan, I did take a business class in high school. Can't remember what grade, maybe 10th or 11th grade, where we learned how to balance a checkbook. But that was really about the extent of my, what I'll call formal financial education. So tell us broadly about the state of scholastic financial education today. So we're talking high school level here, right?
That's my niche, is high school. I've been teaching high school for almost 20 years. The current state, sad to say, is not great. And it hasn't been for decades, right? Your generation, which is, I think, the same as mine, and millennial generation, baby boomer generation, none of us have had really sufficient financial education through our public school education. It's been like that forever. Now, changes are happening slowly. Certain states are starting to require at least a semester's worth of personal finance education in order to graduate from high school. But when I say a few, I mean less than 10. And within each state, some districts and some schools are also turning the page and starting to require that, but it's definitely the minority. So there's still a lot of work to be done about requiring personal finance education or financial literacy as a part of high school graduation. It is starting to advance. It is starting to improve, but it's very slow.
I obviously think it's important. I'm a longtime advocate of financial education. And Dan, maybe I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you about something that's not very popular to talk about, or maybe there is an easy answer for you. If we promote personal finance and financial education in high school, then that's at the loss of what? Like, what subject do we kick out if we bring in financial education? Is there really an obvious outlier there, something that's less necessary?
You bring up a good point. That's one of the arguments that comes up when people like me start advocating for a personal finance class as well. Then what other class are these students not going to get to take?
Study hall?
Maybe, or maybe it's a math or science or some other elective.
Yeah.
My retort to that would be, I don't care what class they drop. It's not as important as personal finance. Tell me some other subject where every single student, 100%, of your graduating students will use that skill every single day of their life from the time they leave the doors of your high school until they die. We make financial decisions every single day, even if that decision is, today I'm not going to start investing for my future. Today I'm not going to start a side hustle to earn extra income. Those are all still financial decisions. We all need to make intelligent, informed financial decisions for our life. We don't all need to make science decisions, math decisions. I should say advanced math. We all use simple math, but trigonometry, advanced algebra, I don't know that we're using those every day. Some, but not many. So that would be my reply to that is, tell me another subject that's more important, and then I'll let you plan the classes.
I think you bring up an excellent point. How many 35-year-olds get up and need to employ calculus or English literature every day? Not very many, but we're all working toward personal finance if we're trading our time for dollars like most adults are at a job. So, I mean, from your perspective, you are a current teacher. You're involved in personal finance and helping students. I mean, is there still really a prevailing mindset of what you're here to do in school is oftentimes learn about how to go to college so that you can get a job and therefore work until you're old and then retire? Is that still kind of the predominant mindset from your perspective there, Dan?
Absolutely. Yeah. That typical American dream pathway is the only option that people really know about. And not just for the Gen Z generation, but I would say every generation, we're just taught this is the path. It's the only option. Go to high school, get good grades, go to college, get good grades, get a good job, get married, have 2.3 kids, have a dog, buy your nice big house with your nice fancy car and a white picket fence, work till you're 65, and then retire and live the good life. As we know, and I think your audience too, of real estate investors, there are many other options that involve reaching financial independence well before 65. And so my goal, especially in writing my book, was to introduce that there are other options, introduce that to teenagers and young people, but then let them make the decision what is best for their personal goals for their future. I would never tell someone what to do because that traditional American dream pathway isn't wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. It works and it's worked for millions of people. What I think is wrong is that we're not letting people know that there are other options so that they can make the best decision for themselves.
We sure do need workers and productivity and teachers and people to pick up the trash from the curb every week, no doubt about it. But yeah, there really are some other options out there that a lot of people don't know about. And when we talk about teenagers, Dan, we're talking about young adults or people that aren't even adults yet. And I think a lot of planning for one's financial future really comes down to avoiding mistakes. I mean, being a teen is a confusing time full of rapid change. A mistake I made as a teen is like, I thought it was the coolest thing to blow my money on like 25 NBA replica jerseys, like these tank tops I could wear around. Like that was really cool. Today, maybe it's crypto meme coins, or maybe it's the predominance of sports gambling now. Or so talk to us some more about a lot of those mistakes that you see teens make today.
They make a fair amount and they make really the same mistakes we made. You mentioned things like cryptocurrency, meme stocks, NFTs, these kind of new hip ways to invest or to spend your money. And I'm not an expert in those, by the way. And I'm not saying that they're bad investments, but they can be if you're going into them uninformed, which I think a lot of young people are doing. The biggest mistakes I see young people make, by far the biggest one, is student loan debt. That's a prevailing systemic issue for, I think, our entire country is that we encourage young people to take on tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt to get that college degree, but we don't really teach them or inform them of the repercussions and the consequences of that debt before we tell them to take it on. And then once they do have it, we don't tell them how to manage it properly. Another mistake young people are making is that they're not building a credit score from basically the day they turn 18. I tell the young people I work with, on your 18th birthday, roll out of bed, go to your computer and apply for your first credit card. Start building your credit now. On your 19th birthday, get your second one. When you turn 19 and a half, get your third credit card and be using each and every one every single month so that you have a bill to pay off on time. Now that comes with an asterisk. Only do that if you are responsible with your credit cards and you've been taught how to use credit cards responsibly, which I think we should be teaching all of our teenagers. And once they have that skill, then they should be using credit cards as a tool to build their credit score. Most teenagers stay away from credit cards because they've been taught that they're evil and they're dangerous. And so they're not building a credit score until they're maybe, out of college, perhaps. Those are the two biggest mistakes I see young people making. And they're so easily, student loan debt is a tricky one, but there are lots of different mechanisms that people can do to graduate with a degree with zero student loan debt. I talk about many of them in my book.
I actually want to see cryptocurrency succeed, but I would imagine a lot of teens are more into what's the latest meme coin that's only been around for 60 days. And yes, student loan debt. I think this is often something that people are encouraged to take out because for decades now, it's been encouraged that you go to college, even if you're undecided on a major, that you should take out a loan. And of course, we know that student loan debt is one of those few debt types that you can't just write off in bankruptcy or other things. That student loan debt is going to stick with you. So it's unusual that people take on this debt burden that's going to be with them for the long term. Oftentimes they're making these decisions at 17 and 18 years old.
It's just such a large, impactful decision to make at such a young age. I think some teenagers can handle it. I think all teenagers can handle it as long as they're given the right information and they're actually shown what the consequences of that student loan debt are. And they're kind of shown what's the ROI of your investment being your college degree. Is it going to pay off? And how quickly is it going to pay off the money that you invested into it?
Well, you bring up something that I'm really glad that you touched on already, Dan, and that is some best practices for teens and young adults to build a solid credit score, because you and I both champion real estate investing, and we're both active real estate investors ourselves. Are part of those tips that you gave for building a solid credit score earlier, is that so that someone can get a loan later for real estate and setting that up?
That's probably the biggest reason. Again, the young people I work with and the young people reading my book, I want them to buy real estate. I don't say they should or they have to, but I definitely talk in my book about how real estate is an amazing wealth builder and an amazing investment, but it's not for everybody. But in order to buy real estate, there's always some other alternate ways to do it, but you're going to need a good credit score. You're going to need to get a mortgage on that house or that property. And so building a credit score, even before you're 18, honestly, because parents out there should know that if they have a teenager who's not yet 18, they can add a teenager as an authorized user to their credit card. And the chances are very good. And you can call the company and double check, but you, the parent, make on-time payments with your credit card every month. If your son or daughter is an authorized user, it'll also be reporting to their credit history, building their credit score even before they're 18. And so starting as soon as you can to build that credit score is super important.
Right. And to think about it, that is sort of a use of leverage, a teen being able to leverage part of their parents' credit and their history for themselves in order to help stabilize their credit score. It's really interesting when we talk about debt here. Of course, it's a nuanced conversation. We're talking about student loan debt a few minutes ago. I talked about why that's bad. And it's also a debt that you are responsible for paying yourself when you're a student. When it comes to building a credit score so that a teen can invest in real estate down the road, maybe even before the time that they turn 21, is kind of this mindset around debt that I think is sort of more of an adult mindset where we acquire debt to create cash flow. That means it is good debt because if you have a cash flowing property, you don't have to pay that yourself. That payment is completely outsourced to tenants if you have debt tied to a cash flowing asset. But I just don't know that teens are really ready for that message. So we talk about a more sophisticated, I suppose, use of debt, Dan. When is the right time to introduce that or have a conversation around that you're building this credit score just so you can take on a bunch of debt? Like, how does that resonate with teens and parents?
Well, I can speak more to the teens. I think teens get it. I think they get it if you explain it the right way. One of the superpowers that teachers have, and I'll include myself in that group, after teaching for so many years, we get very good at explaining things in a way that everyone can understand. We get to be very articulate. And in a classroom of 30 kids, I need to make sure that if I explain a topic, that all 30 kids grasp it and master it. That's my job. And so I think that came through in my book. And so one of the chapters in my book, for instance, is good debt versus bad debt. And in there, I talk about, again, I hope I explain it in a way, and I think I do, that any teenager could understand the idea behind good debt and bad debt. But I explain that some debt is bad: student loan debt, credit card debt, car loan debt, consumer debt. But some debt is good. And exactly what you were saying, if you have debt to acquire an asset that's going to create cash flow that more than pays for the debt service of that debt, then I'll take that all day long, every day. That's going to build my net worth over time, not decrease it. I use examples in the book. House hacking is a real estate strategy that I think is the best by far for young people to get started in real estate investing. And so I talk about house hacking in the book. And the book, actually, there's the workbook that goes with it as kind of part 2. And if the young person follows the roadmap in the workbook, it's kind of like a playbook and gives them tasks to do, then they will end up buying their first real estate property before age 21, right around 21st birthday. And as your listeners probably know, a house hack being a primary residence can require a much smaller down payment. So it's absolutely doable for a young person, even 19, 20 years old, to get a house hack property and start making cash flow and have some of that good debt. I have many young people I work with, 19, 20, 21 years old, that are doing exactly that. It's fun to watch them start to succeed in that way.
It's kind of having a mindset of trying to tie your debt to production rather than tying your debt to consumption. And really, that's a lesson that a lot of older adults really never learn, parsing the difference between good debt and bad debt that way. Consumer debt, like replica NBA jerseys or a fancy car, versus productive debt that tenants pay for you when it's tied to a cash flowing piece of real estate. We're talking with Dan Sheeks. He's the author of a new book you very well may want to check out called First to $1 Million, A Teenager's Guide to Achieving Early Financial Independence. More with Dan when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. A lot of investors choose either cash flow or home price appreciation, but one real estate market could provide both: Jacksonville, Florida. They've got 27% lower home prices and higher rents than the national median. Their market has appreciated 34% more than other comparable cash flow markets over the last 30 years. Get positive cash flow today and above average appreciation for tomorrow. They often have available inventory in Jacksonville, if you can believe that. Start at cashflowandgrowth.com. The people that our listeners can't stop talking about are Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They've provided GRE listeners with more loans than anyone, and it's where I got my last few loans. They finance single-family income property up to 4plexes. They're the #1 lender for beginners and veterans. Start your pre-qualification, chat with President Chaley Ridge personally, and get your custom plan for expanding your cash-flowing portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. You can get a 50-year-old house somewhere or buy a new one directly from the builder with tenant-resilient amenities already built in. With over 3,000 Florida units at different construction stages, they are exclusively for investors. President Wagner and Alaska and team also invest strongly in their own product. That's belief. Start at buildtorentdirect.com. That's build the number 2 rentdirect.com, or text 407-927-5074.
Hi, this is Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, and you're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking about something that sounds like an antipode, an oxymoron, like it doesn't go together. We're talking with the author of the book, First to a Million, a teenager's guide to achieving early financial independence. It's just the sort of thing that a lot of people aren't thinking about, a lot of people aren't talking about. And gosh, I wish I would have met someone like Dan Sheeks when I were younger. And Dan, before the break, we're talking about house hacking and how that could be a good, actionable way for an older teen or someone that's new to real estate before age 21, how they can buy some cash flowing real estate and get in that way. So tell us a bit more about that, maybe the sort of loan type they want to use and the sort of mindset for house hacking.
House hacking is just such a great strategy. I actually did it when I was younger and I didn't even know what it was. I just kind of did it accidentally because it made sense to me. But now it has a name. Brandon Turner coined the phrase house hacking, and it's a good one. When I say young people in this instance for house hacking, I'm really talking about anywhere from 18 to probably 30, honestly. For young people in that age who are looking to start real estate investing, a house hack is such a great strategy. Basically, what you're going to do is that young person would buy a property, and it could be a single family or it could be a small multifamily. Anything from a fourplex down will work. They buy that property with the intention of renting out the extra rooms or renting out maybe the basement of the house or renting out the other units of the small multifamily. And in doing so, they become a landlord, but it is a primary residence still. So you can still get an FHA loan or a conventional loan with a very small down payment because it is a primary residence. And so then you put some renters in place. This isn't a strategy for every young person, and it isn't a strategy that any young person should get into without first researching some of it. There's a great book out there that I love called The House Hacking Strategy by Craig Kurlop, also published by Bigger Pockets. I recommend to every young person that I meet that wants to house hack, I say, go read that book and then you're set. But once you understand the philosophy and the mechanics and the skills around managing a property, which is easier to do when you live there, I actually think, then they can get in that for a low down payment with a great interest rate. They have to have the good credit score. They have to have an income history, which if they don't have parent co-signing could solve that problem. And then they have to live there for a year. And then after that, they can move out if they want to, or they can sell it, or they can continue to live there while renting out the other units or rooms. And it just starts building cash flow from the get-go. It's a much more efficient way to rent, meaning that it can create more cash flow than if you bought a house as a rental property and rented it out to a family. That's great. But if you rent out rooms within the house while you're living there, you're going to make more cash flow. It's a bigger bang for your buck. So that's the strategy that I recommend for young people to get started.
Yeah, there are so many ways to house hack. The way that I began, and most of our listeners know this, is with a 3.5% down FHA loan on a fourplex building where I lived in one unit, rented out the other three. Just like you said, Dan, I had to live there for at least 12 months in order to qualify for that financing. We talked about the credit score earlier. These rules are always changing, but at last check with an FHA loan, the minimum credit score that you needed to qualify for what I just stated was 580. And of course, if you have a higher credit score, you are going to pay a lower mortgage interest rate. So that's the FHA 3.5% down. And then VA benefits basically give you the same thing that I just described with no money down. And like you said, you can do that with a single family home up to a fourplex, since that's all considered residential in the financing world. Just a brilliant way to house hack and get started. But yeah, it certainly is a nuanced discussion. You might want to be able to be a little bit good with people. It is sometimes awkward when you're living on the property with tenants at the same time, and probably want to be in a market that doesn't have population contraction and things like that. But yeah, house hacking is just such a good way to get started. So Dan, outside of real estate investing, do you have any other strategies and tactics young people can use to help them avoid working in the rat race until they're 65 years old? And like I said before, that's probably good that we have some people that are doing that. We need productivity and workers. But because you deal with students and you are a teacher, is there anything else that really seems to resonate with people where you think that rat race path is not for them?
There's a number of different tactics and strategies that kind of align, or I should say that fall under that umbrella of early financial independence. And many of your listeners probably are familiar with the FIRE movement, which is my book kind of ties in personal finance, the FIRE movement, real estate investing all together.
FIRE, that's an acronym that some use for financial independence, retire early.
You're exactly right. many people that are in that FIRE community, including myself, we don't like the word retire too much because that gives the impression that someone's going to stop working, stop contributing, which is rarely the case. When someone reaches early financial independence, they've freed up their time to do other things that they're passionate about on their own terms, but they're still going to contribute and they're still going to generate income in different ways. I don't know if I like retirement, but it does make for a great acronym, being FIRE. So the other topics that I talk about in my book and that I talk about in my classes and with other young people I work with in my community are things like passive income and generating extra income in different ways, side hustles, frugality, mindset, entrepreneurship, paying yourself first. That topic right there, I think, is the most important one that anybody, especially a young person, can take away from a book like mine or your personal finance classes. Paying yourself first, that's so important. Savings rate goals, real estate investing, index fund investing, which is a really popular way to invest in the stock market for those in the FIRE movement, made popular by many people, including J.L. Collins and Warren Buffett. Index fund investing has been proven many times to be a great, if not the best way to invest in the stock market over a long period of time. And so, I think all those topics, if you present them to young people in the right way, can be very intriguing and enticing for them to continue to learn more. And then even, throwing out the idea of, hey, Mr. 19-year-old, what do you think about the idea of retiring before your parents? Wouldn't that be cool? Which is absolutely doable if your parents are working until they're 65, easily doable. And so, that can be kind of a motivating challenge, if you will, as well.
Yeah, a little FIRE acronym that never did resonate with me. Financial independence, retire early. But yeah, you're right. It's not quite accurate. Maybe FIFE, F-I-F-E, financial independence, freedom early would be better. But FIFE just doesn't roll off the tongue and sound as cool as FIRE, I suppose. And yeah, saving is a really interesting word. It probably is important for younger people to at least understand the habits of maybe saving isn't a very sexy word. Maybe getting liquid sounds really cool because, of course, it does take a down payment to get into your first ever property, for example, if you're going to house hack. But of course, savings is not the sole goal because that gets eroded by inflation. Is that something that students would understand? Inflation? Are people even thinking about that, Dan? Because really, we had decades of such low inflation. Inflation is like a relatively nascent phenomenon for a teen.
When I teach personal finance, I talk about it in the class, and it's kind of a hot topic nowadays. They've definitely heard about inflation being talked about on the news or their parents or different social media sites talking about inflation. So they can easily understand it. The idea that if you have $100 and you put it in a savings account that's making basically no interest at all, and inflation is 3, 4, 5, 6%, whatever it happens to be, that you're actually losing purchasing power. You're losing the value of your dollar over time. They get that. That's not a hard topic to understand. But then when you start talking about how do you save, what's the best way to save money? Like, for instance, if you were going to save up money for a down payment for a house hack, I tell the kids, this is my opinion, maybe other people would disagree, but I say, I still think the best place to put your money until you're ready to buy that first house hack is a savings account. An online, high interest savings account was, kind of in quotes nowadays. It's higher than your typical brick and mortar savings account, perhaps.
Right.
But it's
0.4%. Yeah.
Yeah. It's still not very good, but it's safe. And I teach, every dollar should have a job. Every dollar that you own should have a job. And if you're saving money for a down payment on a house or a property, that dollar's job is to be there when you need it for that down payment. And so, yes, it may lose a little value over time, but it's going to be there and it's safe. It's insured. FDIC is going to take care of you. Versus if you put it into a crypto, if you put it into a mutual fund, if you put it into Google stock, it may not be there when you need it. And that may delay the purchase of your house. So even though that dollar's job is to just sit there and be patient, and it is losing a little bit of value over time, that's okay, because you've given it the job of just being there and being safe. You don't want all your money in a savings account, but the money that you've earmarked or given the job for a future purchase, that's a good place for it to be.
Yeah, it does take some capital formation. So when you talk about teaching personal finance, and maybe it's best to bring it back full circle with where we began our chat today, Dan. Tell us more about why there isn't more personal finance education emphasized in the public school system and what we can do to change that, because it sounds like with what you're doing, it's somewhat of an outlier.
There's a number of reasons why personal finance isn't the focus or isn't stressed in the public school system. The top two, which probably wouldn't be surprising if you stop to think about it, the top two reasons are, number one, money. The public education system in the United States is severely underfunded, and it gets worse every year, not better. it does take money to start teaching more classes, to hire staff, to buy the textbooks and the resources. So that's number one. Number two is politics. And there's a little explanation behind that, because the way our high schools are judged or rated today is based on standardized test scores. And those standardized tests, and also things like graduation rate, which is good, but standardized test scores test science, math, reading, writing. They do not test personal finance or financial literacy. So the people who are the decision makers, your principals, your school board members, your superintendents, and your legislators, they are judged by those standardized test scores, which do not include financial literacy. So they're not going to shovel money and resources and staffing to that if it doesn't help them look good. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. Until those decision makers are incentivized to make personal finance education a priority for their own benefit, perhaps, or in some other way, then it's going to be a tough road to hoe.
It's quite an irony that money is one of the reasons why we don't have more financial education in schools. Yeah. And oftentimes that was a result of people generations ago not having financial education. And there's one more thing I want to ask you about that maybe this isn't in your area, so I don't know that you'll be able to speak to this too much, but I'm actually asking about shop class in high school. I'm talking about students actually getting their hands on things like wood and pieces of metal, because an experience like that's really hard to replicate online. And as real estate guys, you and I, we have such a housing shortage in the United States and so few people going into the trade. So can you tell me about the popularity of shop class? Are they even offering that now where you teach high school?
Not as much. I took shop when I was in middle school and maybe a little bit in high school.
Me too.
I'm a Gen Xer. So back then it was pretty standard. But again, this kind of goes back to budget cuts with education being underfunded. Those were some of the first classes to go, is your hands-on classes, home ec, shop, that kind of thing. They are still around, but they're definitely elective classes, and a very small percentage of students will take them. If they're even available at my high school, there are no shop classes. Now, there are classes that would fall under that old home ec title. There are those classes available, but not shop. They're available in the school district if kids want to travel to a different high school to take it, but very few will do that.
So there is some friction there then. Dan, you've got a great way of really distilling down the most salient points for teens so that they really understand personal finance. You do that really well with your new book. And I know that you launched something called Sheeks Freaks in 2019. Tell us about that.
I was starting to teach these early financial independence concepts in my classroom, and young people were really kind of like opening their eyes and getting excited about these different topics. And so I just kind of started thinking, how can I take this beyond my classroom? So I started a couple years ago, just a blog site, writing articles specifically for young people about early financial independence strategies. And that started doing well. So I grew the website. I branched out into some social media. That started doing well. That's when I decided to approach Bigger Pockets about writing a book about this topic, which at first they said no, actually. But then when I resubmitted the idea, they said yes. It took a little work there. And so the Sheeks Freaks community has kind of grown out of all of that. And it is an online community specifically for young people. And in this case, for the community, I'm really kind of like 15 to 25-year-olds, right in that niche.
Okay.
So high school, college, kind of any young person who's highly motivated to learn about their financial future, to engage in these conversations, to employ these strategies. This is a community that's just for them, because what I've found is that that's definitely the minority of young people who are that motivated to spend time listening to a podcast, for instance, or reading a book about personal finance, or reading a real estate book, or watching YouTube channels about growing your net worth. These are minority, but they don't have in their home groups of friends, they don't have people who are like them. So they kind of feel a little bit different, which they are. They're kind of freakish, actually.
Right.
And so the Sheeks Freaks community is about bringing all of them together so they can be around similar aged, like-minded individuals, and then just watch them explode with their goals and their accomplishments and their success. Because now that they're around people who are doing and talking about the same things, they're at the next level really quick.
His online community is called Sheeks Freaks. His brand new book that just published last month, again, it's called First to a Million, a teenager's guide to achieving early financial independence. Dan Sheeks, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me, Keith. I had a blast, and keep doing what you're doing, by the way. Keep crushing it.
Oh yeah, good insightful material from Dan Sheeks today. It sounds like high school financial education is still pretty lackluster. And this is a rare topic that we chatted about here, teenage financial education. And there sure is more that we could discuss on a future episode potentially. For example, should the public school system even be responsible for financial education or not? Or is that more in the realm of a charter school or a Montessori school to build more of that into their curricula? And this might even make the case for homeschooling of your children with what we discussed today. I have been here for you every single week to inform you and help you build your wealth and give you some fresh wealth building perspective since 2014. Helping you build financial freedom when you're actually young enough to enjoy it. And in fact, my goodness, why in the heck would you want to do life any other way? If you appreciate GRE, you can do 3 simple things. Subscribe to the show, write a review for the podcast here, or just simply tell a friend about the show. This show is free to listen to, so, well, hey, then, why don't we just call this the low price of admission? I'd really appreciate you if you subscribe to the show, write a review for the podcast here, or just simply tell a friend about the show. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.